Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Daily Faceoff Live. It's a Thursday, June 15th edition, and Daily Faceoff Live is brought to you by Betano. The game starts now at betano.ca. Canada's sports betting online. 19 plus, please play responsibly. He's former NHL player, current Daily Faceoff analyst, I guess. Colby Cohen, how you doing?
That's on the resume now, Frank. You got it. It's a good day, buddy. Sunny down the shore. The NHL season has finally wrapped up. There's lots to talk about.
Yeah, love to see it. This show, we're going to have a little fun. We're going to take a look at what may be coming next, but also a fun look back at this season. So lots to get to. Let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock. And let's start with just a general overview. Colby, which general managers are facing the most pressure this summer? It's an interesting question because someone's always facing pressure, but more to the point, there are a number of really good answers this summer with all of the cap crunch, expectations, and potential player movement. Who rises to the top of the list for you?
Yeah, so when I started to dig in on this one a little bit, Frank, 3 names, and for very different reasons, came to mind. And I'll start by, talking about Steve Yzerman. And I think he's got $30 million in cap space going into this summer. And I'm going to talk about them a little bit later as we move into topic 2. So I don't want to spend too much time on why I believe Steve Yzerman is feeling the pressure. Next for me is Jarmo Kekalainen in Columbus. They go out, they hire Mike Babcock. To me, that smells a little bit of desperation. The seat is heating up. You've got Cole Sillinger, Kent Johnson, and Marinchenko are all going to be restricted free agents, not this coming season, but the following season. So what does he do? Does he commit to them long-term? Are they bridge deals? Does it play out throughout the season? So I think he's facing a lot of pressure in Columbus to finally get over the hump. And then my last one, Frank, and I know I'm going long here, it's Brian McClellan. They go out and hire a rookie head coach. They're bringing back almost the same team as of now. Okay, there's only 2 forwards on their roster that are technically unsigned, and most of their decor as well. They've got $7 million in cap space. What are they going to do with Tom Wilson and Mantha? Both of those contracts expire after next year. Ovechkin's not getting any younger, so they're kind of in this influx position, and I believe that he's got to kind of get things turned around and really savage the final years for Alexander Ovechkin.
Yeah, agree with you, but I'm going to throw 2 different names at you. One is Kevin Cheveldayoff of the Winnipeg Jets. We know the turmoil that exists there right now in terms of moving out some of those pieces. Connor Hellebuck, it depends on how you look at this. Like, you could say, wow, the Jets are in a spot where, as you look at our trade targets board from last week, look at how many Winnipeg Jets are in the top 5. Pierre-Luc Dubois, Connor Hellebuck, Mark Scheifele. Way further down the board is Blake Wheeler. And you might say, wow, like they're in a tough spot. They got to get something of real value for these guys. Some of them want to leave, don't want to be here anymore. And you're looking at it and saying, that could be a tough spot to be in, or it could be a significant opportunity with the premier young center on the market, with the premier goalie on the market in Connor Hellebuck. To me, I think there's significant opportunity for the Jets, but then there's also pressure to get it right. So there's pressure in Winnipeg. There's also pressure, I think, in Boston. Don Sweeney put a lot of his eggs in one basket for this year with the best regular season team in NHL history for good reason to go after a Stanley Cup. They fall short and lose in the first round. Are Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci coming back? And if they are or aren't, it's probably worse if they are from a cap crunch perspective. They've got to make real moves. Tyler Bertuzzi, they want to keep him. Okay, that probably means saying goodbye to Taylor Hall. If you want to try and find a way to keep Dmitry Orlov, which I don't see as a chance, you're going to need to move one, maybe multiple defensemen. Mike Riley, Matt Grzelcyk. Do you have to move another guy that you've acquired? So you went all in, traded a lot of your futures, which makes sense, but there's real pressure now to take this Bruins team with Pasternak, with Hampus Lindholm, with some others, and put them on a path to success for next season and properly surround them and give them another chance to win a Stanley Cup. So a lot on the line in Boston. So let's transition, Colby, and let's talk about the rebuilders. When you look at how these rebuilding teams will attack the offseason, I think there's kind of two different parts of this. You were just touching on the Detroit Red Wings. How do teams like the Red Wings, the Sabres, the Sens that have been in this spot for the last couple years transition into becoming playoff teams? And then how do you take some other teams that are beginning to go the other way, like the Philadelphia Flyers, like the San Jose Sharks, that are going to be plucking pieces off of their roster? How do they get to the bottom, and how do they do it in a quick and efficient manner like the Chicago Blackhawks did, who are kind of finally beginning to turn the page in the next direction once they draft Connor Bedard at number 1? Thoughts? Did I lose you?
No, you didn't lose me, Frank. You still have me?
Yep.
So look, to me, this is a really, really simple answer, and it's the Detroit Red Wings. They are the team that needs to get out of the rebuilding phase and finally enter the next step. They've been kind of muddling around, not making the playoffs. They're kind of around near a wild card spot, and then Steve Yzerman has continued to sell off. Now, they need stars. It's time for him to use that $30 million to go star hunting. He's got 2 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks this year. That is incredibly value. If he wants to put that together, look at making a potential trade. I still think Austin Matthews is a guy they need to kick the tires on. They need to see if they could make a deal to get him in there. Maybe it's Alex DeBrincat. And then you look at the free agent market. What about a healthy Patrick Kane when he gets back from his hip? He played for Honey Baked. He does have a connection to the state of Michigan. What about Orlov? What about Graves, Killorn, Gostisbehere? These are all guys on your free agent list, Frank, on some of the different articles that you've posted on Daily Faceoff. And I really do believe when you look at the young core and you look at the guys that they've drafted, the first, the second, and the third round picks, they've got a lot of players that are ready to be full-time NHL players. It's time to go out and find those free agents, find those star players, and start meshing the group together for Detroit to finally get over the hump and get back into the playoffs.
I look at everything you just said from the Detroit Red Wings perspective, and I say all of that and more with the Buffalo Sabres. They've got the NHL's longest playoff drought, and they've got so many incredible pieces now there that are in place. Tage Thompson, Dylan Cousins, and then on the back end, you've got the Twin Towers in Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin. That is an incredible 4 pillars foundation that is Chicago Blackhawks-esque from 2007. How do you take that and then take the next step while also making smart moves for your cap space and everything else that comes with it? It's a fun position to be in if you're Kevin Adams as GM of this team to take that next step, but it's also a daunting one to go from, sort of team that was right in the mix to then get over the hump. I think this is a definitive statement for me. I don't think there's any team in the entire NHL, certainly not in the East, than the Buffalo Sabres over these next 2 years to vault themselves into Stanley Cup contention. So a lot of exciting stuff coming in a number of those markets. And as we mentioned, the teardown that's to come in some others. Let's talk about old takes exposed. To have some fun, what is your worst take that you had this year? We all have them somewhere, especially when you're giving opinion all day long. What would you like to highlight for yourself to make yourself look silly? Did we lose Colby?
Well, I didn't think the Florida Panthers were a playoff team. I didn't think they were a playoff team the way they started. I didn't think they made the improvements that they needed to defensively from last year. I was kind of curious, thinking maybe Paul Maurice wasn't the right guy. But ultimately, at the halfway mark, Frank, right around the new year, on TV, I said I didn't think the Florida Panthers would make the playoffs. And obviously, they just played for a Stanley Cup. To me, that is absolutely my worst take of the season.
I mean, no one would have faulted you if you said that in December. January, they were 9 points back of a playoff spot. The fact that they even made it, and the amazing part is in the last week, Colby, that they lost their way in to then let alone go on a run to the Cup final is quite something. My worst take, There's a long list, but I'm going to say that it was saying at some point before the playoffs began that to that point in time, Jack Eichel in his career had been the NHL's most disappointing $10 million skater. And the funny thing is, the only reason I said $10 million skater is because I was giving a nod to Sergei Bobrovsky as being the NHL's worst $10 million overall player. And perhaps some Panthers fans are sitting there today nodding their head like, yep, the way that he played in the Cup final, tough spot to be in for $10 million for the next 3 years. However, Jack Eichel became the first ever NHL player to win the Stanley Cup as a $10 million salary cap hit. So certainly deserve a beating for that one. Well-deserved on social media for those of you who have brought it up. Eichel transformed his game in such a significant way. The 200-foot complete game. I also just looked at his point totals and production the last number of years, not getting to a 40-goal season, not getting beyond 83 points, that I was like, that's not a $10 million level. But he's also overcome a lot along the way, played on some bad teams to start, and is now in a spot where he's enjoying a Stanley Cup and a second-place finish in the Conn Smythe Trophy voting, which we'll get to in a second. Colby, let's talk season in review, and let's have a little fun as well with where we're at in terms of the best individual performances. We're not doing a top 10 highlight show, but what was your favorite individual performance to watch this season?
Yeah, so it was a game that I called and I was between the benches for, and it was Patrick Kane with a hat trick against Toronto right before the trade deadline. Everybody was talking about how he was done. His hip was a problem. Tarasenko had already been traded to the Rangers. There was all sorts of, talk about what was going to happen to 88. And he came out in this game. He put on a show. It was a big crowd at the United Center. You're playing against
probably
Toronto.
Why he got traded, right? Like, that's probably what had the New York Rangers step up and say, yeah, this guy's still got something left in the tank.
Well, it certainly got the owner excited because I don't think Chris Drury ever wanted to make that trade. I think that came directly from ownership. I think it was forced on him. But ultimately, that was a fun game to have a front row seat for, Frank.
Yeah, no question about that. I'm going to go with my two favorite individual performances came on back-to-back nights in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Leon Draisaitl, 4 goals. The day after, Joe Pavelski netted 4 goals for the Dallas Stars. And the wild thing about that, Colby, was that both players ended up doing it in losing fashion. I mean, can you imagine? All I could think of at that exact moment in time was Jumbo Joe Thornton and what he said he would do if he ever got the opportunity to score 4 goals in an NHL game, let alone to do it in a playoff game, let alone to end up losing. I mean, this was the score sheet from that night. 4 goals, 9 for 9 in faceoffs, 4 goals on 6 shots in under 20 minutes of work for Joe Pavelski. By the way, coming off of a long layoff with the concussion, it was definitely one of the memorable postseason performances of the last couple years. And
yeah,
when I say that, Colby, those two guys are probably like, who cares? We lost.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you what, Frank, on a night like that, you go out every shift and you think you're going to score a goal. And it really just becomes an endless ceiling when pucks are falling in for you, especially the way Pavelski scores goals around the net, always in the right place. The deflections from out high, the redirects, the hand-eye, the skill that we see from him, kind of finding his own space and creating his own space within the net front area, especially when, Frank, there is no space around the net ever. So these guys that are able to fill and find and create, it's all the more impressive. But at the end of the day, when you're sitting on the bench and you've got 2 and it's early in a game, you think every shot is going to go in. The net starts looking bigger. Your confidence starts to grow. Your teammates are feeding you. Guys are buying into it. Guys are excited about it. I think when you see a guy like Joe Pavelski sitting on 2 goals, especially after not playing for a while, there's buzz on the bench. There's buzz in the locker room. Let's get him the puck. Let's get the puck into his area. He's hot. Guys love to say, stay hot. It's a term that's on every bench in every locker room. Guys have a ton of fun with it. And I think when you get into those 4-goal performances, like we've seen Draisaitl, Pavelski, we've seen McDavid go on these nights where he's got 5 and 6 points, something does change that night. There is a certain level of confidence. Everything gets slower, everything gets bigger, and ultimately you can just find your way throughout a night. And that's when you reel off one of the career nights.
When that happens, like, do you think the pressure was put on the Golden Knights? Maybe not pressure, but especially the other night as Mark Stone's sitting on 2, that it's like, let's make sure, maybe as they're shooting time after time at the empty net, it's like, let's get this guy a hat trick in the Stanley Cup final.
I think, yeah, there's an element to it, but here's the other thing, and I getting the same thing. Could go for the empty net 3 or 4 times, but at the end of the day, Frank, Mark Stone is going to be on the ice whether you're up a goal or down a goal in the dime for any game. We've seen how complete of a player is. We see his defensive ability. If he needs to win faceoffs, he can. He can, win battles along the wall. He's such a vocal player out on the ice. So he's going to be out on the ice getting opportunities at the empty net one way or the other. But sure, I think you see this all the time in the NHL. You see 2 guys with a 2-on-1. If one guy's sitting on 2, there's always an extra pass to try to get into their teammate. We saw it with Ovi when he was hunting. So, I think there's certain unwritten rules, Frank, on the bench throughout a game when you get into these situations.
It's funny trying to pick out some of these best individual performances of the season. You think back, Colby, and there was a few on the list. Tage Thompson had multiple 6-point nights this year. We were just talking about the Buffalo Sabres. No one else did it once. Austin Matthews had 15 shots on a game. UC Saros, 64 saves against the Carolina Hurricanes one night. I mean, there was no shortage of choices here when it came to making these selections, but pretty awesome for you having the front row seat there between the benches for that Patrick Kane one. I still think that's a huge reason why he ended up getting traded, and to do it against Toronto when everyone was kind of watching. That was a big moment actually for the Hawks season, I think.
Yeah, and I think Kane will have hip surgery this offseason, and I think we'll see him have more moments like that. I think that guy's work ethic, his tenacity, his ability, I think as soon as he's not dealing with that nagging hip pain, he will be back, Frank, and he will be back with a vengeance. So I do expect to see more highlight reel moments out of who I believe is the greatest American-born player of all time, Patrick Kane.
Yeah, Patrick Kane actually already had hip surgery, the hip resurfacing surgery, so it was a significant one. A 4 to 6 month timeline, and Colby, for me, that really raises the question of, does he take his time maybe and see how the season starts and see which teams are in the mix before making a decision, or does he feel 100%. Like he has to do it before then? I don't think this is going to be I don't think this is going to be a money thing, Colby. First off, he's made $125 million, but more than that, there's not really going to be a lot of money left to pay him because it's all going to be spent this summer.
Yeah, I think he takes a 1-year deal, Frank. I think he waits it out. He's a very methodical guy. His family will be heavily involved in the decision-making. His dad is still very much involved and around in his hockey career. I saw him at practice all the time in Chicago this year. So that is an interesting situation that I think we will probably be talking about throughout the summer and then in the early days of next season.
Yeah, agreed. Let's get to our guest today. We're going to talk Dallas Stars with Saad Yousuf. Pleased to welcome back to Daily Faceoff Live Saad Yousuf, who covers the Dallas Stars for The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter at Saad Yousuf126. Saad, so great to have you back today to talk Dallas Stars and their offseason. Obviously, falling short in the playoffs, but a team that has really entered this really interesting transition where the big guns that are driving this team in Rupe Hintz and Jason Robertson and that crew. And you start to see some of the other guys, the older guys, the big money tickets, Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn, for instance, taking a lesser role on this team in terms of minutes and production. And I love the blend with guys like Wyatt Johnson, et cetera, stepping up. But when you mash all that together, Saad, what is the number one offseason priority for Jim Nill and his staff?
Yeah, hey Frank. First of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And I think when you look at their priorities, it has to be on the defensive, on the blue line. I mean, they were exposed in the conference finals by Vegas, and that again, Vegas is probably the deepest defensive core that you have in the league, or one of them. But still, after I kept saying this during the conference finals. If you look at Dallas and Vegas, if you were doing a draft of just the defensemen in that round, you take Miro Heiskanen number one, and then I think the next six guys would be Golden Knights defensemen. And so, Dallas really has a void there. The problem is they don't have a whole lot of cap space to do anything with it. But their biggest hope right now is internal jumps from their first round pick in 2019, Thomas Harley, a guy who they traded a first round pick for, in Niels Lundqvist. But if they're able to upgrade in any way, it has to be the defensive blue line, because that's where their weakness was really shown in the playoffs.
Well, Saad, I totally agree with you, and I'm glad that's where you went with it, because you kind of led me right into my question for you, and it's about Niels Lundqvist. And what I want to know with him is what is his true ceiling? I mean, this is a guy who asked for a trade very quickly out of New York because he didn't like that he would have had to gone to the American League. Last year was his first full season as an NHL. He played 60 games and he put up some points. It was okay, right? Nothing out of this world, but not terrible either. So you're watching him every single night. Do you see a guy who can really become a top four defenseman in the NHL and hold down a blue line?
For sure. I do think that his ceiling is seen as a top four. I don't think that his ceiling is top pairing. But that's a tough ask anyways. But I can easily see him being, a staple on the second pairing on the right side, especially in Dallas, where they've really struggled to aside from John Klingberg, they've really struggled to have a stable, sense of right-handed defenseman. And so, for Niels Lundqvist, it's almost like he needs to be good by his own standards, but by Dallas Star standards, right-handed defenseman is not it's not a high bar to clear exactly. So I think that plays into it. And I think also when you look at the trajectory that Thomas Harley was on it, and Pete DeBoer talked about this at the end of the season, that offensive defensemen have a tougher time adjusting to the NHL game because they have to learn how to play defense. And I think Lundqvist is learning that right now. And if you look at the jump that Harley made from from last year to this year, I mean, he doesn't even look like the same player. And I think that's what they're hoping with Lundqvist as well.
Yeah, good point, Saad. I wanted to ask you about the Dallas Stars pending free agents. You mentioned how cap space is tight, but they really seem to have someone like an Evgeny Dadonov fit like a glove. I thought Max Domi's playoff contributions were huge. How do they make this work? Can they keep one of them? Are both these guys going to end up walking? And what happens with some of the rest of the guys on this list? A Luke Glendening, not expensive and probably a pretty important piece. How do they make it all fit? And who do you think is their number one priority?
I think their number one priority will be Dadonov from a realistic standpoint. I think Domi is the flashier player, but he's 28 years old, and this isn't a particularly strong free agency crop anyways. And so I think Domi will rise in that sense to that. And I think he'll price himself out. He's looking for stability. He's looking for term. The Stars have a lot of big time players under contract, and they have Wyatt Johnson coming up in a couple of years. They have Jake Oettinger's other contract in a couple of years. They have Niels Lundqvist and Harley next year. So I think Domi will price himself out. Dadonov at 34 years old in his third stint with Pete DeBoer after Florida and Vegas. Like you said, Frank, he fits in like a glove. The other guys, Glendening, Kiviranta, those guys I've been told that even though they were on a cheap tag last year, unless they come back on a pay cut on an $800,000, $900,000 type salary, they're probably not going to be back because the Stars feel like they have enough internal guys for those fourth line roles to be in that way. And I think, it makes sense for that. And the other thing to keep in mind on all of this is whatever Dadonov comes back on, whatever these guys, the Stars have two players who are seen as upgrades in the top nine in Maverick Bourque and Logan Stankoven, who are going to be making $800,000 and $900,000 on ELCs. So I think, and those two guys are seen as legitimate upgrades in the top nine. So that is all stuff that factors in as well when the Stars consider their free agents.
Would not be shocked at all to see someone like Logan Stankoven make a bigger impact than someone like Wyatt Johnson did this year. Just more proof that few teams in the NHL have drafted better than the Dallas Stars since Jim Nill has been in charge. Great insight from Saad. Thank you so much for joining us today. You can follow him on Twitter at Saad Yousuf126. Saad Yousuf from The Athletic. This is the All 32 to talk Dallas Stars offseason. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Colby, moving along to our daily Faceoff inbox question of the day, hashtag AskDFO. My question for you is this. With the inspiration coming from the Netflix show that's following NFL quarterbacks, which 3 NHLers would you want Netflix to follow next season? You're muted, Colby.
Thank you, Frank. I will start with Alexander Ovechkin because you saw what he did when he won the Cup. He's now chasing down the great one for goals, and I think he is an extremely intriguing player to the last decade of the NHL. I think he'd be a fun guy to follow around. And then the next one, Alex Killorn, a little bit off the board. And the reason I say that is because there are certain players that just to me look like they have more fun than other players. At the rink, away from the rink, on their social media. The way Killorn celebrated during the Stanley Cups was legendary, had the jet ski out, tons of fun. And again, I just think he's a guy that doesn't take himself too serious, and he would be a good watch for NHL fans. And third, it's David Pastrnak. I mean, is there a guy who lights up the net more than Pasta? There's a guy who doesn't take himself too serious. I think he's always got flashy suits on, never afraid to jump on TV, give a good interview, give personality, let the cameras into his home, see what he's got going on. So obviously for different reasons, but I think all 3 of those players would be pretty interesting.
All right, I'll give you 3 quick ones. Matthew Tkachuk is self-explanatory. You said fun. I don't know that anyone has more fun playing the game than Matthew Tkachuk. 2, Connor McDavid, and some people might yawn and say that's boring. What I want to see is the drive and the consistent approach of excellence. What does that look like on a pure 24-hour basis? The amount of time he puts into regenerating and rest and taking care of his body. I want to see all of that, and I want to see him sort of chill out and be himself. And the third one is a goalie. I need some goalie in my life. Connor Hellebuck. It would be a little bit chaotic. It'd be a little bit nutty at times. Like I envision Connor Hellebuck and a close facsimile to Tiger King. I don't know if that's a step too far, but I think he's a quirky guy who says a lot of different things and has strong opinions. I could see Connor Hellebuck being some legit made for TV behind the scenes. Let's get to Tyler Yaremchuk and our Betano daily bets. No more games on the slate, Tyler, but still plenty to bet on at betano.ca.
Yeah, there's first off, I nominate you 2 for Netflix to follow you around for the entirety of next season. No?
It would be a lot of just like camera placed in my office with my ass glued to my desk making calls all day. So not really that exciting.
Hey, some people might like that.
As long as we could hear what was on the phone, Tyler.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. All right. Anyways, I'm eyeing up a bet for the NHL draft, Frank. Last week you talked about the wager that Betano has up on Fantilli to go second minus 500. You got to risk 500 just to win $100. I got one for third overall that I like more, and it's Leo Carlsson to go third at minus 167. Again, payout is not great, but it really does feel like it's going to go. But darling, Matvei Michkov potentially the wild card there. But is Jarmo Kekalainen going to take a stab on a guy who's 3 or whatever years away from joining the team when his ass is in the jackpot? His job's on the line, Frank. I don't buy it at all. I think Leo Carlsson's a lock at minus 167. What do you think?
I think that's where the draft starts, and I definitely wouldn't be paying under even money to make it happen. I get what you're saying. The Blue Jackets need a franchise center, all that. But remember the gasps, the audible gasps when Jarmo Kekalainen, the Finn, passed on Jesse Puljujärvi at that draft. And that was also, I think, was that number 3 overall?
Yeah, Dubois went 3.
The Blue Jackets have a chance to surprise. So I would definitely not be spending anywhere short of even money to make that happen.
Okay.
So that pick number 3, that's where the draft begins. Bedard 1, Fantilli 2. We'll see what happens at 3.
Yep.
Thanks to Tyler for our Betano Daily Bet segment. That brings us to garbage time, and holy smokes, I might fall over, but Colby actually has something to say.
Well, Frank, you don't usually like to share your airtime, but today I'm taking garbage time. And I do not understand how Jack Eichel did not win the Conn Smythe Trophy. And I'm so glad that you, the president of the association for the writers, you posted the ballots so we could see who voted for who. And honestly, shocking to me, because we are voting on the best player in the playoffs, not the guy who scored the most goals in the playoffs. And I think we all get enamored with goals. I think the media in particular, writers get enamored with goals. And just remember something of Marchessault's 13 goals, how many of those directly came off the stick of Jack Eichel? More than half of those goals came from Jack Eichel. Jack Eichel dominated defensively. He dominated in the neutral zone. He dominated in the offensive zone. He took a monster hit. He came back. He was physical. He is the best player in the playoffs. I think he was snubbed. I like that you voted for him. I like that Emily Kaplan voted for him. Elliot Friedman, he did get 5 first place votes. But how about the 2 guys who didn't even have him on their ballot? Okay, the first guy, Colby Guy. I don't know who that is. We share
a name though.
We share a name, but he didn't even put him on his ballot. And the other one was, I believe, Lane McIntyre in Toronto, did not have Eichel on the ballot. And I wonder, what are you watching for you to not even have him on your ballot? I don't know. What are you watching in the playoffs?
This, first off, you're preaching to the converted because you know that I voted for Eichel. 2, I would say this is kind of what makes the process fun. Everyone's got a different viewpoint and a different way that they approach it and see it. And some people say that Jack Eichel can get Jonathan Marchessault the puck, but it's still on him to get it into the back of the net. And when you score 13 goals tied for the league lead, and 10 of them either tied the game or put your team in the lead, those are enormous goals to score. Yeah. So
he's a sniper. He's a sniper. He can
and
score.
He's a killer. But here's the thing: I can see why people voted for him, and I had him second. To me, Eichel was the guy. But real quick, I just wanted to, before we run, throw up this photo because I just thought it was an iconic image from the Stanley Cup playoffs. One of the best hockey photos ever taken. For one, there's a million things happening here. A picture is worth 1,000 words, but the team is in the shape of a heart, which is actually kind of amazing. To get this overhead shot from Associated Press Images, it's an iconic picture that will last really for the test of time in the Golden Knights franchise. But to also see Jonathan Marchessault's face right in the very middle of it, the pure exasperation and celebration that he has. Phil Kessel's bald dome at the very bottom, the guys all hugging each other. To me, this is an epic hockey photo, and just wanted to give it a little bit of love as we close out garbage time. So thank you to Colby Cohen, Saad Yousuf, our technical producer, Aaron Bordato, as well as Tyler Yuremchuk. As always, that'll do it for today's edition of Daily Faceoff Live. We'll be back Friday, 12 noon Eastern. The offseason rolls on. 15 days from tomorrow will be free agency on July 1st. Who's counting? Talk to you then.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.